Thanks. All right, so this is going to be the most valuable lunch keynote you ever experience. This is my colleague, Claudio Waller. He's here to be a smart guy on stage to help answer your questions. This is going to be the most valuable keynote you ever experienced because we are going to hit in the next just scarce moments together on the most important skill you can have as a leader. If you're in the federal government, if you're in state government, local, if some of you venture back into the private sector, no matter what sector you're in, if you believe Jim Collins, his book Good to Great, he says the #1 skill you can have as a manager or as a leader is the ability to pick the right people for your team. And what Steve mentioned, when Wall Street Journal did a nice review of our Who book, they said, isn't this topic of picking talent, of hiring, isn't this the most important aspect of leadership? And yet the one that remains the least understood. So folks, I've got bad news and good news. The bad news is no one's going to teach you how to hire well. They don't teach it to you in high school. They don't teach it to you in college or even some of the best grad schools. And you'll hardly learn it on the job. So you might fall into a trap of using what we call in the Who book voodoo hiring methods. And so what we're going to do in the couple minutes we have together is we're going to tell you what the voodoo methods are so you can avoid them. And then we'll share some insights from 2 decades of research and practice and consulting with leaders in the federal government, state and local governments, billionaire entrepreneurs have implemented these processes successfully. And what my real hope is, Claudio, and my hope for you all, is you will differentiate yourselves in your jobs. You will rise to the top because you will be better than the next person at hiring. So without further ado, after my prepared remarks, we're going to have a fun and interactive discussion. And that concludes my prepared remarks. So what's so hard about hiring? Has anyone here hired someone yet? Raise your hand. Great. So what's hard about hiring? And what does it look like if you get it wrong? Right, raise your hand and then say some stuff. Yes, ma'am. Nice and loud.
It's ugly.
It's ugly. Who's got a story they're willing to share? Your brothers and sisters here of what does it look like when you get a hiring decision wrong? The gentleman in the yellow?
Time waster.
Time waster. What flavor of time waster are we talking about here?
Things that there's people that may portray themselves one way and then they show up a completely different way.
All right, so mic runners, here we'll do it like this. I'll call on someone, and then you run and put the mic in their hand. Okay, so I love what this guy just said. Okay, you're up next, right there. See, right? Three at that table, all mic'd and ready. Here we go. But this guy says something interesting. He said, what's so hard is you think of someone one way in the interview, and then they show up at work a kind of a different person. In our Who book, there's a funny guy in there named Jay Jordan who said once he actually had to fire someone. So he sat down with the person, and he said, hey, look, I got bad news. And then Jay had a copy of the person's resume and said, I hired your resume, but unfortunately what I got was you. All right, more war stories, or what's hard about hiring? What does it look like when you get it wrong?
Poor outcomes.
Like what? Give me the emotion behind the poor outcomes. What are we talking here?
Unsuccessful students.
Yes, right. If you're hiring in the education sector, you get bad, bad teaching happens. Sir, #2 at this very participative table in the middle here.
It's waste of time and energy for the organization as well as to your group.
Yeah, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. It's stressful. I remember there's a 1, 2. Hold your hands up. There you go. Mike. And there's this guy named Nate Thompson I met at an event like this once, and it was kind of on break. And I walked out, and Nate had 2 phones. He had one phone in his ear, and he was doing another thing on a phone. And then he hung up his phones, and he's just sitting there like this. And I was strolling to the restroom. I was just curious, hey, Nate, what's going on? And he said, well, it's all just kind of a strain. And apparently, he had just had to fire his 5th key right-hand person in 3 years. So he's hiring and firing, hiring, firing, hiring, firing. And he said, actually, I was just talking to my wife, and she's up in the mountains on vacation right now, and I can't be at vacation because I have to do the work of 3 people in the office because we keep getting the hiring wrong. So Nate couldn't even go on vacation. All right, one more thought on, what does it look like? Can you give us a war story? Like, what does it look like when hiring goes wrong?
Okay, so I hired this gaffer for a film shoot that I was working on.
Yes.
And
what does a gaffer do?
A gaffer is a person that basically, he's an electrician on set.
The electrician. So how much trouble could a gaffer really cause?
Well, when you don't have lights, it's kind of hard to shoot film. So he was completely unprepared. We ended up going from an 8-hour day to a 17-hour day, which means all those people need to be paid for the overtime. So it effectively killed our budget, and then we needed to actually go back and get more money for the time we wasted. So I looked bad, and my crew looked bad, and it was awful.
So it sounds like time wasted, money wasted, the lights not working properly, pain and suffering. Claudia, I'm going to ask you about voodoo methods in a second. But for now, for this second, I'll just say, this is kind of like a life passion of mine. We've started businesses around helping leaders hire better. We've written books for the private sector, for the public sector. We give talks like this. So this is a skill you can develop. It's not like an inherent strength, like we love the strengths movement. This is literally like a skill anyone can develop. And all you have to do is do 4 things if you would like to achieve a 90% hiring success rate for the rest of your career. So you gotta do 4 things. And I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll tell you what the bad way to hire looks like, and then we'll close, and then we'll answer questions and stuff. Okay, so, and by the way, if anyone's single here, you can use this exact method for picking a mate. My wife and I use this method for hiring babysitters, and I'm not kidding you. My 3-year-old at the time we had not used this method for hiring our old babysitters. And this one babysitter, I disguised her name in the Who book, but her real name was Misty. Okay, so just between us, her name was Misty. And Misty once was watching, we have 4 kids. And I was working from home one day, and I watched out our driveway, my 3-year-old running naked into traffic. Don't worry, she was okay. So Kendall, my 3-year-old, I was on a conference call, I put her on hold, ran out, grabbed my 3-year-old, literally she was just about on the edge of traffic. So scooped her up, brought her back in the house, and Misty was sitting there, and then Misty said the last sentence while still in my employ, which was, "Oh, there she is." There's so many kids, it's hard to keep track of them all. We had 4. Yeah, we had 4. So, but it is important in that context, in that job, to keep track of all 4. So my wife was like, all right, Mr. Hiring Guru, we have a horrible track record of hiring even babysitters, but I realized we were doing 0 of the 4 steps in this Who approach, the A method for hiring. And after actually using our methods, we've had a much better run of it. So you can use these methods for picking anyone for anything. And before I tell you what the 4 steps are, Claudia's going to tell you things to avoid when you're trying to hire people well. So what are some the voodoo methods that folks just invent?
My favorite is the art critic.
The art critic.
What's the art critic? Anybody have a guess? Ooh, that's interesting. Say more.
I know what I like when I see it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you think you know what you want, and you maybe spend more time telling the person what they want to hear or what you want them to hear versus hearing their story to figure out whether they're the right person. How about some other voodoo techniques? Anybody flip through the book and see some others?
My boss only hires people that are just like him.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The yes man or woman. What else has gone wrong when you've done hiring?
I actually had a funny thing having a client, investment firm, we're working with, they had a horrible hiring track record, and we asked them, so what is the method you use to hire people? And the head of the firm said, hockey players. And I was kind of like, I was getting ready for a whole explanation, and like that was it. And I said, well, what do you mean, hockey players? And this guy basically said, yeah, I'd like to hire clones of me. I was a college hockey player, and I find hockey players are hardworking and team-oriented and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's like, not only like sort of, that's not a good approach. So, so yeah, the clone approach, that's bias is a horrible thing. Any other favorite voodoo methods?
The airline captain.
What's that?
The airline captain.
Look, we only have like 7 minutes left here. That one's very subtle. Let's do, oh, I know, hypotheticals.
Ooh.
That's another one. You're going to get trained the wrong way to interview. This one's fun, where there are interviewing trainings out there which will say, here's what you do. You figure out the important competencies, and then you ask people how good they are at them. And you ask them for how, like you give them a case study on like, how would you handle a certain type of situation? So where are my mic people? Because I'm going to ask you a quick question. All right, got mic people. So woman in the red outfit right there. Yep, you look very attentive and alert. So can you give her the mic, please? I'm now going to demonstrate what hypothetical interview questions look like and why they don't work. What's your name, please?
Aaron.
Aaron, how would you resolve a conflict with one of your peers if you came to work at our organization?
I would do a lot of listening.
She would start by listening.
Great.
What next?
Then I would try to have a conversation.
She would just sit down and have a conversation with the person.
To work out our differences.
Ah, awesome, thank you. That was perfect, right? So when you ask people hypothetical questions, a strange thing happens. You get hypothetical answers. So don't do that. I studied psychology, got a PhD in psychology. They made me read all these studies on the effectiveness of different interview methods. And one thing, I'll save you the 5 years of brain damage, the one thing I learned from reading all these studies, literally thousands of studies, it said that basically if you ask hypothetical questions in interviews, you're going to get the decision wrong because hypothetical answers don't really matter much. Like people know what the right answer is. Okay, so that's what not to do. Now here's what we want you to do. We want you to do 4 things. And it's going to sound really straightforward, but we just did a talk yesterday at the Department of Energy with the like 50-year-old version of you guys. And I'm telling you, this was actually news to a lot of them. So I'm describing it, you're going to be like, that seems really straightforward. Like surely grown-up federal leaders use these approaches all the time. But they don't. A lot of folks use their homegrown approaches to hiring, and so what I'm telling you about is a simple 4-step method that really works well. Our clients and folks who read the books and practice this stuff report they have a 90% hiring success rate, which is really high because the average in the United States of America is a 50% hiring success rate. So if you just kind of wing it, freestyle it, kind of make up your own approach, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. You got about a 50-50 shot. If you use these 4 steps, you'll get a 90% hiring success rate. And people who are really good at building talented teams tend to get promoted. So I want you to get promoted. I want you to have as much impact on our great country as possible. Step 1 of the 4 is called the scorecard. You like a headline on what the scorecard is?
Define what has to happen in the role.
Define what has to happen in the role. So it's a set of outcomes. We'll talk about that in a sec. The second step is called source, which is how you actually generate a flow of candidates. The third step is called select, which is how you pick one through special interviews. I will tell you about. And the fourth step is called sell, which is the moment when you actually get the person to say yes. All right, so let's see here. There's probably, I'm going to give you, since we have like 9 seconds left in our allotted time, I'm going to give you like just the highlights, and you're going to be like, that sounds partial, but yeah, okay, so you can like read more on this later, but here are like the things you got to know about each of the 4 steps. So scorecard. So many people, as I'd say especially in the public sector work we do, confuse inputs with outcomes when they're trying to write out like what they want someone to do. So like, you guys seem like a very bright group. Like what would be an example of like an like an input versus an outcome when you're describing a job? Yes, please. Writing policy. And what is that? An input, right? That's like an input. That's like something that you do, but then like what's an outcome? Yeah, getting a policy passed or something, right? Yeah, okay, so, right, so in hiring, so these are subtle little nuances, but they really matter. In doing a scorecard, we find, the hard part and the important part is identify the outcomes that you want the person to actually achieve. So other examples of outcomes, like do an outcome.
Create 500,000 new jobs in the next 2 years.
Boom. Raise $4 million by December. You know, if there's a number and it's an outcome, it's a result, that's what you really want to think hard about and identify. What does like an A level of performance look like in the way of outcomes for a role that you're hiring for? Other inputs that you want to avoid are, people will say like, duties include, and it's like a bunch of generic stuff, writing policy, or duties include community outreach. Like, what is that? If someone does that well or not well, like, how do you know? You know, but if you say community outreach, like one of my friend's sisters works for the State Department, and she does community outreach, but she's like very specific goals. It's like, you know, basically job creation and other metrics and measurable stuff is the result that she's shooting for. So avoid the trap of inputs, really focus on what are the outcomes that you want someone to accomplish in the role. And we even, on a pro bono basis, we work with elected government leaders, federal, state, local, and even them, these are like the cream of the crop. We got to push them sometimes to be more specific about like, what is the outcome you really want here? Like, let's not just be generic and vague, let's actually be specific. So when you're specific, it makes it easier to figure out if someone has the juice to be able to accomplish the outcome. Then if you're vague, then it makes this whole hiring thing so much harder. That's scorecard. Source is the second step. This one's really fast and easy. Oh, and I'll cater it to the public sector specifically. You guys will be told, and you'll be tempted to source your candidates through boring, bureaucratic, ineffective means. You will be told, literally, you got to just pick from the slate you're given, you know, that kind of thing. No, you don't, okay? Like, in many, many, many places, federal, state, and local, you as the leader, as the hiring manager, you can, of course, you have to post the job openings, like do that and see what kind of resumes come in, that's fine. And like your departments of personnel and administration will give you a slate and like, hey, that's fine. You too can put energy into identifying good referral sources and contacting them and saying like, hey, who do you know who's really good at speech writing? Who do you know who's really good at community affairs? Who do you know who's good at these different things? And so you gotta like help with the sourcing. So just know that you'll be told you can't help with the sourcing in a lot of cases, but you really can, it's just people don't. So there's that insight. And sourcing's literally as easy as making a list of like, okay, I'm hiring a speechwriter. And who are the 10 people I know who aren't speechwriters per se, but maybe know the speechwriter? So like write the list of 10, call them up, say like, hey, look, we're hiring a speechwriter. Who do you know who's really great? And the quality of the candidates you'll get through working your network like that generally is a lot higher than the resume dump you'll get using online means. Okay, select. Now this is the hard one. So scorecard, step one, remember, measurable outcomes, that's what you're writing down. Whether it's for a role you're hiring for, babysitter, lawn care service, or a spouse. Okay, and then source. Source through your network, don't just wait for people to give you a slate. Okay, now the third step is called select. And this one's daunting. This is like the hard one. So in select, there are 4 types of interviews you can use depending on like if it's the first time you're talking to someone or if it's like a finalist that you're really settling in on. I'm going to emphasize the last interview really that you do. So once you've whittled down 5 or 10 candidates and you're kind of down to like your favorite 2 or 3 and it's like, oh my gosh, this is an important hire, I don't want to mess this up. At this point you bring out the heavy artillery. And the heavy artillery we call the who interview. And this is like the most robust way to interview someone that you can do. And well, I will oversimplify, but it's actually not that much more complicated than what I'm going to describe. But it's really like asking someone 5 questions for every chapter of their career. So picture like your life is, busted up into, you have like school, and then you have like job 1, job 2, right? So for every chapter in your career, you ask the candidate, hey, I'm really interested in your answer to these 5 questions. And the 5 questions are, for that job, what were you hired to do? What did you accomplish that you were proud of? Give me some examples, Always collecting data, collecting numbers, collecting verifiable data. Third question is, what did not go so well in that job? And then you just stare at them until they tell you something, because they don't want to tell you the negative stuff. The 4th question is a really fun one. This is huge, actually. This is like the best part of our brief talk here. The 4th question is you ask them what their boss's name was in that job, and then if you really want the ninja way to do this, you pull out a pen and you like write down like what was your last boss's name? You. Teresa Gordon. And how do you spell that? Gordon. D-O-N. Okay, great. And what was it like working with Teresa? And then she'll tell me, yeah, Teresa was very involved or not involved manager. Like it's really interesting as the potential employer to this person here. How do they talk about their bosses, and what do they like and not like about their bosses? Then here's the real kicker. You say, hey, if we get a chance to call up Teresa at some point and do a reference call, what do you think she'll say about you? And it's a great question because you might do a couple reference calls, who knows who you'll talk to, but that thought that you might do a reference call makes her really want to tell you the truth. To say like, oh, I'll tell you what she'll say. I was really misunderstood by Teresa, but I'll tell you what she'll say. And this is kind of fun. So like one of my colleagues named this term torque, and torque, like T-O-R-C. They thought it was funny because you kind of like torque on the person to get them to tell the truth. But it stands for threat of reference check. That's a great question. And so if you don't torque them like that, and if you just ask someone like you, can we get a mic? Stat! Right here! Right there! You, ma'am. If I asked you without torquing, without just straight up, what are some of your weaknesses? Like, what are like the fake weaknesses that you might want to tell me that you have? What are some? Come on.
I actually have a weakness that I share that's honest when I'm asked that question.
You are honest. That's great. I need someone else less honest. I need you, this woman. I want someone with a not an honest face to please. I'm kidding. She actually raised her hand. What are your weaknesses?
I'm a perfectionist.
You are a perfectionist. Geoff, my weakness is perfect quality work. So if you don't throw the torque thing in about the boss, if you forget to like do the little like, here, watch me write your boss's name down tactic, and you just go out and ask someone what their weaknesses are, you don't get very valuable data. So thank you for that. That's that. So. Oh, and the last question, remember I told you there are 5. So for every chapter in their life, it's what were you hired to do, what did you accomplish, what were some low points, who is your boss, and do the boss question, what would they say about you? And the last question is, why did you leave that job? And that question is really interesting because you could tell if the person did a good job, their story around why they left the job sounds a little something like, I did really well, as I told you, and I got the award for most valuable, and then, this other contributor, basically, who's in charge of this really big foundation, hired me away, and I went there. If you get the sense people are getting pulled up to bigger and better things out of a job, that's like a good sign that they did well and they're moving on to bigger and better things. If you, however, Claudio, hear someone getting pushed out of jobs, that's like a bad sign. And our data suggests if people are getting pushed out of more than about like 1 in 5 jobs, like, that's bad. That the probability they're going to make you happy when they don't seem to be able to make other people happy, is very, very low. Like, what does push sound like? Like when people are being all subtle, but they're getting like pushed out of jobs. Like, why'd you leave the job?
We just came to terms of agreement.
Yeah, that's my favorite one. That's like a fake weakness. It was mutual. Oh, mutual. And they think it gets them off the hook. They're like, well, I left the job because my boss and I agreed that it was a mutual decision. And I always like to ask them, like, who brought the topic up first? And I've had people tell me, like, well, my boss did. And then you go, so let me get this straight. After your boss told you to leave, you mean mutual, like, you didn't refuse to leave the premises, right? Like, all right. But don't get smart alecky with them. I'm just teasing for your benefit. But yeah, in fact, when you're interviewing, this is actually a serious point, you want to have a tone. I'll leave you with this. This is it. This is the wrap-up sort of like insight. And then you got to take off, but I'll stick around and answer private questions if you want for a few minutes. But here's the tone you want to use. The tone you want to use when you're interviewing is one of intense curiosity. A lot of newer interviewers are like too serious. I'm going to really give you the third degree and show you what a tough boss I am. Or they're too like jokey and informal, like, hey, I like you, do you like me? And let's just kind of be friends here in the interview. Like, don't do either of those extremes. Where you want to be, your center of gravity should be intense curiosity. And I'll give you a bonus final concluding point, part deux, is what, how, and tell me more with your intense curiosity are your favorite follow-up questions. So like, what did you accomplish in that job? How did you do that? And tell me more. Like, what'd you do? How'd you do it? Tell me more. What'd you do? What were the goals? What were your results? What did you do to accomplish that? How did you accomplish that? What, how, and tell me more are really good drill down questions to just get more content. And with that, I cannot tell you how much fun this has been for Claudio and me. Thank you guys, and good luck, and thanks for your service.